It had been the kind of holiday that doesn't just live in photographs but lingers in the heart, like the scent of the sea air that greets you in the morning. The days had passed in a gentle rhythm. Sunlit breakfasts by the balcony, the clinking of coffee cups, the hum of conversations in a language that rolled off the tongue like music. Every corner of the town had felt alive, from the cobblestone streets warmed by the midday sun to the quiet lanes where Jasmine climbed the whitewashed walls. And there we were, two friends walking those streets as though we had always belonged there. We had shared laughter that came from the deepest place, the kind that makes your eyes water and your cheeks ache. We had wandered without maps, letting curiosity decide our turns. We had eaten meals that tasted like the essence of summer-ripe tomatoes, olive oil so rich it coated every word we spoke, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. The holiday wasn't just about seeing Greece. It was about feeling it seep into every part of us. The air carried the salt of the Aegean, and at night the cicadas filled the quiet with their steady song. In those moments there was no thought of endings. We lived as though the days would stretch endlessly ahead of us, each one another page in this shared story. We watched the fishing boats return at dusk, their silhouettes moving slowly across the horizon, nets heavy with the day's catch. We sat by the shore, letting the water lap at our feet, and spoke about nothing and everything, dreams we hadn't dared to share before, memories that still made us smile or ache. But even as we soaked in every moment, there was an unspoken truth between us. Time moves whether we notice it or not. The days that seemed to stretch forever had quietly folded into the final morning. The suitcase in the corner of the room had been slowly filling, and now it stood zipped, ready, an uninvited reminder that the chapter was closing. That morning was different. The sunlight felt softer, almost reluctant to shine too brightly, as if it knew this was our last day here. The sounds outside were the same, the chatter of shopkeepers, the distant rumble of a motorbike. But I heard them differently, with the ache of someone already missing them. We walked slowly through the town, past the familiar little bakery where the owner always greeted us with a smile, and the cafe that had become our second home. Every face we passed felt like a part of this tapestry we'd been weaving during our stay. There was no rush, yet every step seemed to bring us closer to the inevitable moment when we would have to leave. We lingered by the harbor, watching the gentle sway of the boats, trying to memorize the curve of the coastline, the way the water shifted between blue and green under the morning light. These weren't just sights. They were fragments of a feeling, one we both knew we couldn't fully take with us. We didn't speak much that morning. Some feelings are too full for words, and silence felt more fitting than trying to explain what we both understood. It wasn't just the end of a holiday. It was the end of a small, perfect world we had built together for these days. In its place would come the rush of everyday life, the noise of schedules and responsibilities. But right now, here, the world still belonged to us. When the taxi finally pulled up in front of the hotel, I felt a shift inside, a quiet acknowledgement that the magic of a moment is precious because it doesn't last forever. We loaded our bags, and I took one last look around. The streets, the sea, the faces we'd come to know. They would all continue without us, but they would live on in the quiet corners of our memory. And as the car pulled away, I realized that what we were taking with us was far more than souvenirs. It was the laughter that had echoed down these streets, the warmth of strangers who had become friends, and the shared understanding that some chapters end not with a full stop, but with a lingering comma, leaving room for the possibility of returning someday. Sometimes the beauty of a place is magnified by the knowledge that you can't stay forever. The lobby of the Hotel Oracle felt different that morning, as though the walls themselves were aware that we were leaving. It was quiet, but not empty. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, touching the worn wooden floor with a gentle glow, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee drifted from the small counter near the entrance. Every detail, from the soft hum of the ceiling fan to the faint creak of the front door, felt sharper somehow, more vivid, because I knew this would be the last time I would experience them. We had spent so many mornings here, coming down the stairs to be greeted with warm smiles and the easy rhythm of life that the staff seemed to carry in their very presence. This place had been more than a hotel. It had been a part of our story, a backdrop to every laugh, every late night conversation, every plan for the day ahead. And now, standing with our bags beside us, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in. Costas was at the reception desk, his posture relaxed as always, though his eyes seemed to soften when he saw us. He set aside a stack of papers and came around the counter, his familiar handshake turning into an embrace before I even realized it. There was no rush in his movements, just the slow and steady kindness of someone who has learned that goodbyes should never be hurried. "Safe travels," he said, his voice warm and steady, and I knew those two words carried more than just politeness. They held the quiet acknowledgment of the days we had shared here, the morning chats about the weather, the laughter over our attempts at speaking Greek, the unspoken understanding that hospitality is about more than service, it's about connection. Eleni appeared from the small side office, her smile carrying that same mix of joy and sadness that comes when you're happy for someone but wish they could stay just a little longer. She pressed small paper-wrapped parcels into our hands, local pastries she must have prepared earlier that morning. "For the journey," she said softly, and for a moment I couldn't find the right words to respond. Sometimes gratitude is too big for language, and all you can offer in return is the look in your eyes. We lingered there as if stretching those last few minutes might slow time itself. The conversation flowed in pieces, short sentences about our trip, questions about when we might return, small reassurances that distance doesn't erase connection. Every word was cushioned by pauses, those silences where you can feel emotions moving between people without being spoken aloud. Outside, the taxi waited, its engine a faint murmur that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. But still we stood there, unwilling to let the moment close too quickly. The walls of the hotel, the scent of lemon polish on the banister, the faint echo of footsteps on the tiled floor, they all seemed to be saying their own quiet farewell. When the time finally came to step through the door, there was a heaviness in my chest that was not just about leaving a place. It was about leaving people who had, in such a short time, made this corner of the world feel like home. We hugged again, longer this time, and as I stepped back, I tried to memorize every detail of their faces, the kindness in their expressions, the way the morning light fell across the entrance behind them. As we walked toward the taxi, I glanced back one last time. Costas had returned to the reception desk, his hand resting lightly on the counter, while Eleni stood just outside the door, her hand raised in a small wave. There was no grand gesture, no overly dramatic farewell, and yet the simplicity of it made it all the more powerful. It was the kind of goodbye that stays with you, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. The car pulled away slowly, and through the window the hotel grew smaller until it disappeared behind a bend in the road. But even as it faded from sight, it didn't feel gone. It stayed with us, woven into the fabric of our memories, carrying the warmth of every smile, every kind word, every small moment that had made the Hotel Oracle more than just a place to stay. Some goodbyes close a door. This one left it open. Some of the most vivid memories of our time here had nothing to do with the famous sights or the postcard, perfect views. They were made in the small, unplanned moments spent with the people who welcomed us as if we had always belonged. From the first day, there was a warmth in the air that went beyond the sunshine, a sense that this was a place where kindness was woven into the rhythm of daily life. It wasn't just in the gestures, it was in the way people looked you in the eye, the way they remembered your name, the way they made space for you in their world without hesitation. Costas was one of the first to make that impression. It started with something as simple as directions when we were trying to find a quiet spot to watch the sunset. He didn't just point and send us on our way. He took the time to draw a little map on a napkin, explaining which alleyways had the best views, which streets would bring us past the bakery that sold bread still warm from the oven. His advice came with a smile, and before we knew it, our quick question had turned into a half-hour conversation about the town, the sea, and the way life moved here at its own pace. It was the same with Eleni. She had a way of noticing things without you having to say them. If you came down in the morning looking a little tired, she'd quietly bring you a stronger coffee without asking. If she overheard you admiring the local pastries, she'd slip an extra one onto your plate just to taste. She seemed to carry the spirit of the place in her every action, quiet generosity that asked for nothing in return. One evening, we found ourselves sitting on the small terrace behind the hotel, the air cool and scented with jasmine. Costas joined us, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of something pale and fragrant. "Local," he said, handing them over with a grin, and we talked long into the night. The conversation moved easily between stories of his childhood by the sea, the traditions of the town, and the way the same streets can look entirely different depending on the season. There was no rush, no polite excuse to leave. Just the easy comfort of people sharing space and time. On another afternoon, Eleni invited us into the kitchen. It was warm and filled with the sound of pots clinking and the steady rhythm of chopping vegetables. She showed us how to fold the dough for a local pie, so the edges came out perfectly crisp, explaining that the secret wasn't just in the ingredients, but in taking your time. Everything tastes better when you're not in a hurry. She said, and I couldn't help but think how much that applied to life as well. These weren't grand events, but they became the heartbeat of our stay. They reminded us that travel is not just about places, it's about people. A view can be beautiful, but it's the conversations shared in its presence that make it unforgettable. Costas's laughter when he teased us about our pronunciation. Eleni's quiet way of making sure we never left a meal hungry. The way they both seemed genuinely interested in our stories as much as we were in theirs. These were the things that gave the days their richness. And it wasn't only them. Through their introductions, we came to know the fisherman who waved at us every morning as we passed the harbor, the shopkeeper who insisted we try a sample of honey before buying it, the old woman who sat outside her house knitting and smiling at everyone who walked by. Each interaction was a thread, and together they wove a tapestry that was warm, colorful, and entirely unique to this place. By the time we were preparing to leave, I realized that what I would miss most wasn't the scenery. It was the feeling of being recognized, of being part of the everyday life here, even if just for a short while. These connections didn't need grand declarations or promises. They existed in the simplest acts, in the shared laughter, in the quiet understanding that we had been part of each other's lives, however briefly. Some people you meet for a moment, others stay with you for a lifetime. The ride to the airport began quietly, the kind of quiet that isn't awkward but heavy with unspoken thoughts. The car moved slowly through the familiar streets, each turn revealing places that had been part of our days here. The cafe on the corner where the smell of fresh bread drifted out in the mornings, the harbor where the boats swayed gently against their moorings, the narrow lane where flour spilled over whitewashed walls. They passed by like a film reel, and I found myself trying to hold on to each image, as if remembering them more intensely might make the moment last a little longer. The city seemed to wake reluctantly that morning. A few shopkeepers stood outside their doors, sweeping the steps, greeting neighbors with nods and smiles. The light was soft, casting a golden glow over the streets we had walked so many times, and for a moment I wondered if it looked different because we were leaving, or if it had always been this beautiful and I was only noticing it now. As we left the town behind, the roads grew wider, and the sea appeared beside us, stretching endlessly to the horizon. It was calm, the surface shimmering under the sun, and I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. The water didn't rush, it didn't fight its own direction. It just moved steadily, as if to remind me that endings are simply part of the journey. The sound of the tires on the road and the low hum of the engine created a rhythm that seemed to match the steady beating of my thoughts. There was a bitter sweetness in the air. Part of me wanted to turn around, to take one last walk along the shore, to sit in the quiet of the hotel terrace with a cup of coffee and let the morning unfold slowly. But another part of me knew that leaving was what gave this experience its meaning. If we could stay forever, the moments might blur into one another. It was the act of leaving that made each memory sharper, more precious. We passed small villages along the way, each with its own life unfolding. A man stacking crates of oranges outside a shop, children chasing each other down a dusty path, an old woman hanging laundry that swayed gently in the breeze. These glimpses of everyday life were a reminder that while our journey here was ending, the place itself would go on, as it always had, waiting quietly for the next chapter to be written. The closer we got to the airport, the more the landscape began to change. The open fields gave way to roads lined with signs, the hum of traffic growing louder. It felt like the in-between space, a place where one chapter was already closing, but the next hadn't fully begun. I thought about what waited on the other side of this journey: familiar streets, familiar routines, the comfort of home. And yet, I knew I wouldn't return the same. Something had shifted. Travel has a way of changing you in ways you don't notice at first. It's not just the souvenirs you carry in your bag, it's the way you see the world. The way you notice details you might have ignored before. The way you understand that there are countless lives unfolding beyond your own. This ride wasn't just taking us away from a destination. It was carrying us toward a new version of ourselves, one shaped by the people we had met, the stories we had heard, and the moments we had lived here. As the airport came into view, a mixture of emotions settled in sadness, gratitude, and a quiet sense of anticipation. The glass walls reflected the morning light, and the sight of planes in the distance made it all real. In a few hours, we would be somewhere else entirely, surrounded by different sounds, different faces. The taxi slowed to a stop, and for a moment neither of us moved. There's always that small hesitation before you step forward into what comes next. But then the door opened, and the warm breeze carried with it the faint scent of the sea, as if giving one last reminder of what we were leaving behind. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the ending and the pull of the beginning all at once. Some journeys take you to a place. Others take you to a new part of yourself. This one had done both. Looking back, I realized that what made this journey unforgettable wasn't just the places we visited or the beauty of the landscapes. It was the fact that we experienced them together. Travel has a way of magnifying everything. The moments of joy, the small frustrations, the surprises you never planned for. And when you share all of that with someone, It binds you in a way that nothing else quite can. We had walked side by side through streets we'd never seen before, discovering them in real time, pointing out the same little details that caught our eyes. A balcony draped in flowers, the way sunlight fell on the cobblestones, the laughter spilling out from a cafe we'd never entered but somehow felt part of. We didn't have to explain why something mattered. The other person already understood. That unspoken understanding is the quiet heartbeat of true friendship. There were days when everything seemed to go perfectly, when the weather was kind, the meals were delicious, and the conversations with strangers felt like gifts. And then there were days when we got lost, when the rain came out of nowhere, when our plans had to be abandoned altogether. But even those moments turned into stories we now laugh about, the kind you tell later and realize they were never inconveniences at all. They were part of the texture of the adventure. Friendship on the road is different from friendship at home. At home, you have the cushion of routine and distance, moments to retreat into your own space. When you travel together, you're living each moment in close orbit, learning each other's rhythms, seeing each other at our best and our worst. And instead of creating distance, it somehow pulls you closer. You learn to read each other's silences, to know when to push forward and when to slow down, when to talk and when to simply walk in shared quiet. We had our rituals too, small things that became anchors in unfamiliar places. The morning coffee, always taken slowly, watching the day begin around us. The habit of choosing a different path back to the hotel each evening, just to see where it led. The way we could both spot the same bench or seaside rock and know instantly it was the perfect place to pause. These little patterns stitched themselves into the larger tapestry of the trip, giving it a rhythm that felt entirely ours. And then there were the conversations that seemed to flow more easily than they ever could at home. Maybe it was the lack of distractions, or maybe it was the way travel strips you of the need to keep up appearances. Sitting by the sea late at night, or leaning against a sun-warmed wall in the middle of the day, we spoke about things we'd never put into words before, dreams we'd been too cautious to say out loud, fears we'd tried to ignore, memories that still shaped us in quiet ways. There's a depth that comes when you open up in a place where no one knows you, where the only people listening are those who matter most. The adventures themselves, whether it was climbing a hill for the view, tasting something completely unfamiliar, or stumbling into a festival we hadn't known was happening, were amplified by the simple fact that we could turn to each other and say, "Can you believe this?" That shared glance, that mutual awe, made everything feel more real, more alive. Travel changes you, but it also changes the way you see each other. You begin to notice strengths you hadn't fully appreciated before. The patience in a long queue, the humor in a tense moment, the quiet decisiveness when a choice needs to be made. And you notice your own changes reflected back, shaped in part by the way your friend experiences the world alongside you. By the time we reached the end of the trip, I knew that the memories weren't just of a place. They were of us in that place, at that time in our lives. Years from now, the details might blur. The exact street names, the order of events. But the feeling will remain. The feeling of moving through the world together, of sharing not just the beauty and the wonder, but the ordinary, imperfect, and deeply human moments in between. Some adventures end when you return home. Others live on in the friendship that made them possible. From the very beginning, I wanted the story to feel like a conversation between friends, and hurried, simple, and easy to follow. Every word was chosen with care, not to impress with complexity, but to connect with clarity. When you're listening in another language, it's not just about the vocabulary. It's about the way the words breathe, the way the pauses give you room to understand, the way the sentences carry meaning without rushing. So, I spoke in a way that gave space for each image to form in the mind, like watching a scene slowly come into focus. I imagined the listener walking alongside me through the streets, hearing the soft shuffle of footsteps on stone, feeling the morning air that was just cool enough to notice. The language was kept gentle, not because the listener couldn't handle more, but because simplicity has a power of its own. It strips away the noise, leaving only what matters. A phrase as small as "the sea was calm" can carry more weight than a paragraph of tangled description if it's spoken with intention. Pronunciation mattered just as much. Each syllable needed to land cleanly, but naturally, without sounding mechanical. I wanted it to feel human, warm, approachable, the way a friend might tell you a story over coffee. There's a rhythm in English that can either help a learner follow along or leave them lost. By keeping that rhythm steady, like the gentle rocking of a boat, the listener could settle into it, letting their mind focus on the meaning instead of scrambling to catch up. The pace was slow enough to be clear, but never so slow that it broke the flow. It's a delicate balance, too fast and the listener struggles, too slow and the story loses its life. So I imagined each sentence as a step forward, steady and sure, guiding without pulling. Pauses became as important as the words themselves. A pause after a moment of beauty allowed the listener to picture it fully. A pause after a moment of emotion gave them time to feel it. I also thought about repetition, not in a way that felt redundant, but in a way that reinforced understanding. A simple image might return later in the story, like the scent of the sea or the sound of footsteps, giving the listener a familiar anchor. That familiarity builds confidence. It tells them you've heard this before and you understood it, which makes them more ready to take in what comes next. Descriptions were chosen with the learner in mind. Instead of saying the azure expanse stretched endlessly, I might say the sea was a deep blue and it seemed to go on forever. The meaning stays the same, but the path to understanding is smoother. It's about making the language serve the image, not the other way around. When a learner can see the picture clearly in their mind, the words naturally settle into memory. There was also an awareness that learning happens best when the listener is emotionally engaged. If they care about the characters, the place, and the events, they're more likely to pay attention, to want to understand. That's why every detail, whether it was a farewell at the hotel, a shared laugh with a local, or the sight of the coastline at dawn, was told in a way that drew them in. Once they were invested in the story, the language became not just something to study, but something to experience. The tone throughout was gentle but not flat. Emotion carried in the voice, even in the simplest sentences. You can say she smiled in a dozen ways, but when you say it with a hint of warmth in your tone, the listener feels it. That feeling helps them remember. It's not just learning English, it's learning to hear the music of it, the subtle shifts in tone that carry meaning beyond the words themselves. And perhaps most importantly, I wanted the listener to finish not just with more English in their mind, but with the quiet satisfaction of having been part of a story they could truly follow. That feeling, that they understood, that they were there, is what makes them want to listen again, to learn more, to keep going. Because language learning isn't only about grammar and vocabulary, it's about building a bridge between people, one clear, careful, and heartfelt sentence at a time. Some stories are told to be remembered, others are told to be understood. This one was meant for both. Our time here has been more than a journey. It's been a tapestry of friendship, kindness, and moments that will stay with us forever. From the warm smiles at the Hotel Oracle to the quiet beauty of each shared adventure, every detail has left its mark. Though we leave today, the memories will walk beside us wherever we go.